Dusty Mesa, Arizona Territory, 1881. The spring winds came hot and unforgiving, carrying trouble straight toward Elara Vance, the lone rancher fighting to protect the land her father left behind. For 6 long months, the ruthless Silas Thorne had been cutting her fences, shifting her boundary markers, and creeping in like a rattler ready to strike. But everything changed the day a quiet stranger named Daniel rode through her gate, a man with steady hands, a sharp mind, and a past dangerously tied to Thorne in ways Elara could never imagine. What began as a simple job offer soon unraveled into a web of greed, fire, and long-buried vengeance on the Arizona frontier. Watch the full story to uncover how one man fought to save her and her land. Tell us where you're watching from, partner. Join our Sleep West family. Saddle up as we're riding into the story.
The spring of 1881 arrived at Dusty Mesa, Arizona Territory, not with gentle showers but with a biting hot wind that seemed intent on stripping the copper-red earth bare. Elara Vance, 28 years old and proprietress of the Vance Ranch, felt the weight of that wind in her shoulders every time she hauled a bale of hay. Her independence wasn't a choice, it was a birthright forged in grief and necessity. Her mother Lily had died when Elara was barely 5. Leaving her alone with her father, Arthur, whose main legacy wasn't money, but a deep, stubborn love for the land and a work ethic as unforgiving as the summer sun. Arthur had passed 3 years prior, leaving Elara in charge of the cattle, the feed, the ledgers, and the relentless cycle of a working ranch. The ranch kept her busy, but there was another part of her inheritance, a sprawling, untouched section of arid land to the north, known locally as the Shadow Mesa Tract. Elara had focused every ounce of her energy on keeping the main cattle operation afloat, neglecting the tract. It wasn't about the cattle, not yet, it was about the boundary markers. For the last 6 months a creeping calculated annoyance had been turning into a genuine threat. Her eastern neighbor, a predator named Silas Thorne, was moving with the quiet efficiency of a rattler. Every few weeks Elara would ride out to the eastern fence line bordering the Shadow Mesa Tract only to find a section of barbed wire cleanly snipped, the original wooden posts uprooted, and Thorne's grazing sheep nudging their way onto her acreage. He was testing her, seeing how far he could push before the independent rancher broke. Elara needed help, not just another hand to mend fences, but a mind sharp enough to untangle the old survey lines, and a back strong enough to deter the brazen aggression of a man like Thorne. It was late morning, the sun already a brutal white disk in the sky, heating the dust around the cattle pens into a thick, shimmering haze. Elara was bent double, wrestling a jammed sluice gate that fed water to the trough, sweat making streaks in the dust coating her neck. A deep voice, measured and calm, called from the gate of the main corral. "Ma'am?" Elara Vance. She straightened slowly, wiping her brow with the back of a leather glove. Standing at the high-weathered juniper rail fence was a man who looked like he'd been carved out of granite, all clean, broad planes and height that seemed to dwarf the fence posts. He wore a simple dust-colored canvas coat, even in the heat, and a wide-brimmed felt hat that hid his eyes in shadow. His boots were worn, but his posture was straight. He looked like he knew the difference between hard labor and honest work. "That's me," she said, her voice rough from the grit in the air. "If you're here for the job, you can step inside." The man didn't hesitate. He swung a long practice leg over the top rail, landing lightly on the inside. He walked toward her, with an unhurried, economical stride. "Name is Daniel," he said, extending a calloused hand. His grip was firm and steady. "I saw your notice in town. Said you needed a man who could handle cattle, fence lines, and a bit of administrative work." Elara sized him up. He wasn't boastful or overeager. His eyes, when they finally emerged from the shadow of his hat, were a startling clear gray, observant, but reserved, like a deep pool of still water. "The administrative part is the key," Elara explained, leaning against the now cooperating sluice gate. "I've got a tract of inherited land that hasn't been surveyed properly in years. I'm upholding the claim, and my neighbor, Silas Thorne, thinks that means he can just treat the lines like they're made of chalk." She didn't mince words. "I need someone who can go over my father's old land deeds and surveyor's notes, figure out if Thorne has a legal leg to stand on, And if not, stand beside me when I tell him to back off. It's hard work, Daniel, and it's dangerous work. You'll be sheltered, fed and paid what I can afford, but I don't need a hero. I need a partner in this fight." Daniel simply nodded, his expression unreadable. "I understand, ma'am. I'll start now. Where are the records?" Daniel proved his worth instantly, moving between the dusty work of the corrals and the meticulous paperwork of the office with equal focused energy. After 3 days, Daniel cornered Elara in the cool, dim office. He had laid out 2 large brittle maps and a stack of annotated papers. "Your father, Arthur, was a careful man, but there is ambiguity in the 1875 survey," Daniel stated, tapping a pencil on a deed entry. "The claim staking fee? The territory started charging that 3 years ago," Elara responded. "It's not the fee, it's the boundary markers themselves," Daniel corrected, his gray eyes fixed on the documentation. "This tract was originally marked by iron rods and established by the land office. That survey is still valid. But Thorn has replaced your father's rods with carved stone markers, moving the line deep onto your property. The ownership is clear. The boundary is not. So the land is unequivocally ours," Elara whispered, the implication settling heavily. "By law, yes. By deed, yes. By the look of the new fence line, no." They rode out before dawn the next morning. When they reached the neglected border of the Shadow Mesa tract, the change was immediate. Thorn hadn't just snipped wire, he had systematically moved the line. Over 100 yards of the Vance property was now indistinguishable from Thorn's. "He's using survey trickery, not just cattle," Daniel said, standing up. His voice was low, edged with a focused, cold anger. "He is trying to establish a claim through squatting and fabricated surveys. This man is dangerous, Elara." "He is," Elara agreed, her jaw tight. "Everyone in Dusty Mesa knows Silas Thorn is a snake. He's been accused of land grabs in 2 other valleys. He uses intimidation, threats, lawsuits, anything to bleed people dry." Daniel went utterly still. The gray of his eyes hardened to flint. "Silas Thorn," he repeated, the name a stone in his mouth. "You know him?" Elara asked, startled. Daniel turned, and the shadow was gone from his face, replaced by a raw, painful recognition. "I do, Elara. That's the man I've been searching for." The ghost of the past. Daniel led his horse toward a nearby stand of sparse cottonwoods. He sat on a low rock, kneading the brim of his hat between his hands. "My father, John Danielson, owned a small productive plot near Tucson. Thorn wanted it. My father refused to sell. Thorn tried everything. When my father wouldn't budge, Thorn sent men. They made it look like a tragic accident, a carriage breakdown on a remote trail." Daniel began, his voice flat with memory. "I've been tracking his methods for 2 years. He always uses the same pattern. Target isolated, neglected land, create a legal complication through false surveys, and then use violence when the owner pushes back." Elara understood. Daniel hadn't arrived simply looking for work. He was here on a pilgrimage of vengeance, disguised as an itinerant ranch hand. "He killed your father over land," Elara stated. "He did," Daniel confirmed. "And now he's doing the same to you. My work here isn't just about your payroll anymore, Elara. It's about ending his game for good." They spent the rest of the day formulating a detailed, multi-layered plan. Daniel would use the next week to covertly document the exact locations of the original boundary markers, photograph the illegal wire, and seek out any witnesses to Thorn's surveyor fraud. Simultaneously, Elara would prepare the documentation to legally challenge the false boundary. They had to involve one other person. Sheriff Rex Stone, a tired, honest lawman in Dusty Mesa. Elara went into town that night to gauge the sheriff's willingness to listen. But the plan had to be shared, and somewhere, a thread snapped. Silas Thorn learned they were plotting. Trial by fire. The night air was still, oppressive, and thick with the scent of dry hay. Elara woke to the sound of crackling, not the gentle snap of a dying campfire, but the roaring hunger of a large, accelerating blaze. The main hay barn, which sat perilously close to the house and the foreman's quarters, was engulfed. A plume of black smoke was already climbing hundreds of feet into the Arizona sky. "Daniel! Fire!" she screamed, scrambling out of the bunkhouse. Daniel was already outside, hauling buckets from the well, his face grim. "Fetch every blanket and coat you can find. We need volume. Focus on the main house and the office. Keep the flames from jumping." The next hour was a frantic, terrifying battle against the heat and the speed of the blaze. They worked with desperate speed, dipping buckets into the well cistern and smothering the edges of the inferno. They had saved the main ranch house and the office, but the hay barn and several months' worth of feed were gone. Daniel stood over the smoldering ruins. "They sent a message," he said. He scanned the ranch, his eyes hardening as he pieced together the sequence of events. Thorne's reaction was too fast and too specific. Someone who knew the details of the legal plan had given them away. As the thought crystallized, a shadow moved near the ruined barn's edge. 3 large figures stepped out of the darkness, faces masked by bandanas, carrying long, rusted tools. Thorne had sent them back to finish the job. "Stay low, Elara," Daniel commanded, pushing her behind a stack of empty barrels. The confrontation was swift and brutal. Daniel moved with a focused, cold precision that belied his gentle nature. He met the charging man with a devastating blow. The second man swung a heavy chain, which Daniel expertly dodged, using the chain's momentum to whip the man's legs out from under him. The third man, the largest, pulled a short, heavy knife. "Thorne wants the girl to know she's finished," the brute yelled. Daniel didn't answer. He disarmed the man with a quick, painful twist, sending the knife flying, and ended the fight with a swift, final blow that dropped him. Daniel stood over the unconscious, bleeding men. "We changed the game," Daniel said, his breath ragged. "The original plan is dead. Thorne thinks we're scared, and he thinks he's won. We have to use his arrogance against him." He knelt beside her, his voice low and urgent. "We are going to play this like we lost everything valuable. You go to Thorne, you tell him that the fire finished you. Tell him you're ready to sell the Shadow Mesa tract because it's not worth the risk. Make it sound like you're broken. Make him waste his time drawing up a purchase deed that will satisfy his greed. Give him a distraction." "And you?" Elara asked, her throat tight. "I'm going to use that time to get the evidence from the inside. I need 2 days. 2 days to find the paper trail he leaves when he thinks he's safe." Justice and Dust. Elara rode out to Thorne's property 2 days later, her body aching, her resolve brittle, but her eyes sharp. She found him in his parlor, smoking a cigar, his face a picture of smug, false sympathy. "Elara, my dear," Thorne cooed, standing to greet her. "I heard about the fire, terribly sorry. These old places, they just go sometimes, don't they?" Elara spoke in a low, defeated voice, playing the part of the weary rancher who had finally been broken by life. "It broke me, Silas. My father's ranch is one thing, but that's scrubland up north. I don't have the heart for a fight over it. The risk isn't worth it. I'm ready to sell the Shadow Mesa tract. Make me an offer, Silas." Thorne smiled, a slow, shark-like grin. "A sensible decision, Elara. I'll have my lawyers draw up the deed immediately. A reasonable offer for that worthless dirt, of course." While Thorne wasted his resources preparing his fraudulent purchase agreement, Daniel was a ghost. He used the cover of darkness to infiltrate the property. He found what he was looking for, an old storage shed with a false back, containing ledgers detailing illegal water diversion, records of threats against his father, and most damningly, a series of signed receipts and ledger entries, linking him to the 3 masked men who had attacked the Vance ranch. On the 3rd day, Daniel rode straight into Dusty Mesa, the damning evidence folded carefully inside his saddlebag, and walked into Sheriff Rex Stone's office. The sheriff, who had long suspected Thorne, but lacked the spine of evidence, listened patiently. When Daniel laid out the receipts for the mercenaries, the fraudulent land deeds, and the meticulously gathered proof, Stone's weary demeanor lifted, replaced by a cold, righteous anger. "You thought he was above the law," Stone muttered, strapping on his sidearm. Sheriff Stone and a small but determined group of deputies arrived at Thorne's fortress-like house just as the man was signing the prepared sales contract for the Shadow Mesa tract. Thorne, caught with the fraudulent paperwork and the evidence of his violence surrounding him, went quietly. The evidence Daniel collected was overwhelming. It didn't just pertain to the land grab, but to a pattern of systemic corruption and murder. Thorne was jailed in the county prison and later sentenced to life for his crimes against the territory. The week after Thorne's conviction, Daniel sat with Elara on the porch of the Vance ranch house, watching the spring sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and violet. The court declared your father's original survey valid. The deed is clear, and the reward money posted for Thorne will help rebuild the barn, Daniel said, consulting a final sheet of paper. The Shadow Mesa tract is yours, clear of all claims. Elara looked at him, not at the paper. She hadn't realized how reliant she had become on his quiet, steady presence. You don't have to go, Daniel, she said, her voice soft. There's more than enough work. We could rebuild this place together. You have a claim here now, too. Daniel smiled then, a genuine, rare expression that softened the hard lines around his eyes. My work is done, Elara. My father's ghost can finally rest. That was the debt I came to collect. He rose, picking up the small, worn canvas bag that held his few possessions. This isn't my land. It's yours. And you run it better than anyone I know. He walked across the yard to his horse. He mounted without fanfare, gave her one last nod, a gesture of respect and finality, and turned the horse toward the dusty road leading out of Dusty Mesa. Elara watched him go, the broad silhouette of his shoulders receding into the twilight. Daniel, the stranger who came seeking justice, had left his own quiet mark on the Arizona earth, and then, satisfied, had returned to the open road, leaving Elara Vance and her ranch free, independent, and secure in the spring of 1881.